All right. Okay, so we did our project on Kenya, the country Kenya, and fixing the problem of dirty water and specifically diseases like cholera. And where our intervention is about implementing latrines, but we'll talk about that later. But some facts to start off with is that more than 40% of the world population does not have access to a toilet, which is a pretty significant number, I would say. But focusing more on Kenya, there's 40 million people that in Kenya, and 17 million are without clean water. And there's a few reasons because of that, but one reason we want to emphasize is because of contamination. And many poor urban Kenyans only have access to this polluted water, which is increasing their chances of getting cholera and having endemics of cholera in their areas. So again, slightly less than half of rural Kenyans have access to water, and most of these Kenyans, they obtain their water through wells, and sometimes the pit latrines that they use are too close to the wells, and microorganisms travel from the latrines to the wells, which contaminates the water. And the wells should be in elevated areas and 15 meters away from the latrines. So just some facts about cholera. It's a waterborne disease, like we talked about earlier, and it's mostly from the water from wells. Some symptoms that are from cholera are diarrhea. It's pale and milky. There's vomiting. There's dehydration due to the diarrhea and vomiting. And some physical features are sunken eyes, and then there's also low blood pressure. And one major thing is that there's an electrolyte imbalance, which causes muscle cramps and shock, which usually leads to death. And it's a very serious disease relating to children. They usually have an altered state of consciousness with seizures and turns into a coma. And so this is just a little picture describing how cholera affects the body and how it spreads and where it's taking place in the body and the treatment, but we won't get into that. So right now, many of the Kenyans, they have simple pit latrines, and the benefits are that they're easy to build and cheap to make, and the slab and the shelter can actually be reused. So once it's all used up, they can move it over, and that the excrete is isolated. But as expected, some of the downfalls are that it can be odorous and that flies breed easily, which spreads disease more. So what we want to implement is ventilated improved pit latrines, VIP latrines for short. And so how these are different is that the downfalls of the simple pit latrines are reduced and eliminated by adding a vertical vent pipe with a fly screen at the top. So if you see in the picture that there's a pipe running up and down from the pit to the outside air. And this is helpful because the continuous airflow through the top of the structure and the above vent removes smells and vent gases to the atmosphere. And the fly screen on the vent pipe acts as a trap for insects because the light is shining through, so that attracts the insects that might enter the pit. So location is important in building these latrines. It needs to be located downhill, like we mentioned earlier, and it cannot penetrate any groundwater because that'll contaminate it. It needs to be 2 meters above any water table. And the site that it's being built on should be well drained and above flood level. And there's ways that you can prevent water getting into the pit, and we'll talk about that in a couple more slides. Some other measurements are that it should be 30 meters away from hydrological and hydrogeological sources, and the pit latrines should be at least 6 meters away from the home. So some of the basic ideas about the latrines are that the pit should be 1.5 meters deep, and it should be about 1 to 1.2 meters in diameter. And the pit should be lined with stone or brick, and the latrine should be semi-dark, so it should be light enough that you can see everything, but if it's dark enough, that makes the amount of insects that enter decrease. And this next point, I kind of did some research, and some say that you should have a lid, but in most of them, it says that you shouldn't have a lid if you want airflow to come in and out of the pit so that the smells aren't so strong. The door should face the prevailing wind, again, for the smells of the latrine to not stagnate in the latrine. And so the basics of building the latrine are the foundation, floor, mound, and the actual shelter. So the beginning is the foundation, and the foundation prevents flooding of the pit or escape of any larvae or entrance of burrowing rodents. The base should be high enough to raise the floor, and it can be either in a circle or square. And the materials used are concrete or sand or gravel, whatever is available. And then the lining of the pit can be brick, dried mud, burned mud, or adobe, or it can be rough cut logs. So it has to be hardwood and termite resistant. Next is the floor, and it covers the whole entire pit, and it should be larger than the pit and rest firmly on the foundation to avoid collapse. And it can be the same material as the foundation. It should have a smooth surface with a slope towards the squatting hole to provide an easy drainage for urine and water to clean the floor. And it can be a squatting type or a raised seat, whatever is preferred in the area. And the opening shouldn't be bigger than 250 millimeters, pretty much just so a small child can't fall in. And the shape of the hole is a keyhole, and there should be footrests next to the keyhole. Makes it a little bit easier. And so the floor is it's called a slab as well, and this is what can be also moved to different latrines once the latrine is used. So we don't have to go through all of this. This is basic stuff, but some of the points that I like to point out is that that they use a old bucket for when they use concrete. So the old bucket's for the cue hole shape, and so you have the bucket there, and then you put the cement around it, and then you remove the bucket about 3 hours later as the cement begins to harden. And then right after that, you cover the cement with damp cloths or cement bags just to keep it damp for about 5 days so it can receive its full strength. And you can remove the slab after 5 days. The mound is something super important that I found out. It's built from the earth around the latrine, and so you use it to protect from surface water that can enter and destroy the pit and from flooding. And it should be built to the level of the floor and should be well tamped. And it's even better to have it built up to protect from tides and floodwaters. And it can be consolidated from stone facing to prevent it being washed away by rain. So if possible, it'd be ideal to have stone so that if it's built by dirt, that there's no chance of it being washed away. And in the front of the entrance, so where the door would be, it is good to supplement the mound with a masonry or brick built step to add extra protection against wear. The shelter, as you can imagine, is used for privacy and protection, and it's placed on the base and high enough for comfort. And the roof should cover shelter and have a large overhang to protect the mounts and walls from damage, so when it rains or anything like that. The materials are pretty basic for the shelter. It's bricks, tin, or wood. So around the latrines, there should be good enough maintenance. The grass should be well kept. The door should be closed at all times, so nothing is entering the latrine that shouldn't be. It should be cleaned daily with water and ashes. It's not good to deposit some tins, glass, or plastic into the pit. But I thought this was really interesting, that it's actually suggested that people dispose of household waste or organic waste, like certain foods, to be placed in the latrine to help reduce the odors. But it also decreases the life of the pit, so it kind of has some good and bad to it. And then when the contents reach about 0.5 meters from the surface, that's when the contents should be covered in soil and a new pit should be built, or it can even be, the contents can be taken out by hand if the community feels like that is better than building a whole new pit. So during an epidemic, when disease is very prevalent in the area, the floor should be cleaned daily with bleach. It needs to be kept dry so mosquitoes do not enter, and so it doesn't spread disease. If too much water does enter, some good ways to absorb that water and odor is using ashes or dry horse or cow dung. And then last, no disinfectant should be added to the pit, which I thought was really interesting. So common problems that do arise from building these pits is that the pit is shallow, which allows light to shine through, which attracts the flies. But with the VIP latrine, the flies should be attracted to the light in the pipe, so that shouldn't be a problem. And sometimes with the simple pit latrines that they do have, they're not lined and they're on unstable soils. And the floor does not drain properly and is not smooth and does not facilitate cleaning. So it's important that necessary measures are taken to make sure the floor is nice and smooth and that it's not being rushed while it's being made. Another problem that has occurred is that if there's a lid, there's a lack of lid or ill-fitting lid. So bugs are entering the pit and causing problems. And then the last problem is the no ventilation pipe that is common in simple pit latrines, but we want to fix that and build VIP latrines, so that wouldn't be a problem for us. So some barriers quickly is that how can we actually have the people use them, and how do we maintain them and make sure that they're being maintained? We need to appoint people to do that. Cost is always a concern, but if there's already pit latrines, it might be a little bit easier. And then if there's any cultural or habit barriers that the people may have that may stop them from actually using the latrines. And I think Shelby will take the rest of the slides.
Okay, so as Sarah just mentioned, there are some barriers that can come from these latrines, but there are some ways that we can address some of those barriers, and one of them is having incentives so that people can use them, and so more people will want to use the latrines and be educated about them. And another reason we need to have more education about these latrines is, as Sarah kind of mentioned, there are some problems with them, and if you don't research enough about them, then people will put the latrines in the wrong place, and at that point they're kind of useless. So as we kind of mentioned before, location is everything. And so in population dense areas, you know, there should be more latrines so that people can have higher access to them. And, you know, they should always be downhill. And so a lot of work has to go in beforehand to figure out where they should go. So the maintenance can be difficult, as Sarah just went through some of those things. If we, as she listed, you know, needs to be cleaned every day. Often they need to be rebuilt. The latrines need to be rebuilt or dug out. I know I wouldn't want to do that. So it can be a little difficult to figure out when the latrines need to be rebuilt. But it would be important for the leaders of villages or towns to be educated first on how these latrines work, so that they can teach other people and so that they can make sure that they're being well maintained. So it's not just an afterthought, you know, this is a place where people go to the bathroom, but it is important that they're well maintained, and the leaders of the villages definitely need to make that a priority in how they're running their village or town. And so the latrines are also, they're pretty cost effective. To me, they're a good balance between having a running water bathroom system and, you know, having the simple pit latrines that we were talking about. The ones with the ventilated pipe are pretty cost effective, and they provide so much, they're a lot easier to work with, and they're very beneficial. And so another barrier that Sarah addressed was that the culture can have some issues, and we'll get into our intervention in a second, but we were thinking that we would educate everyone, especially children, as part of a primary prevention. And this would encourage every family member to be participating in it. And the reason we wanted to educate children was because every member of the family, as we know, in these poorer countries are usually at school, at work, or, you know, busy doing something just to survive. And so, you know, our incentives need to address those issues, and we need to be understanding of that culture. You know, so we're not taking away from the time that's so valuable to these people. So next slide. Okay, and so incentives are so important, especially for these people. If they don't have a reason to go to education classes, our interventions are completely pointless and they're going to fail. And so, and we know these people are very busy. They're not busy the same way we are. They're fighting for their lives every minute of the day, and, you know, every minute counts for these people. So if we're going to teach a class, they need to have a reason to be there. And so, and the health educators that would be teaching these classes about the latrines, they need to be very well prepared so they're not wasting time, and that they're giving these lessons in about an hour or less. And so a possible incentive that I thought of would be, you know, a whole day's worth of food for every member of the family that attends these classes, or being paid for their time, because we would want them to understand how important it is for them to be there. And like we said earlier, we want them to understand that we know how important their time is, and that they need to, you know, be there for these education classes. And then, so some of these classes that we wanted to do, like I said, we wanted to primarily teach the children. We really wanted to get them involved because there's a lot of children in Kenya, and they have such a power over their families, because they can teach the older adults about what they learned, and they're the rising generation. So as soon as they learn something, they'll be able to pass it down as well. And so for younger children, early in their school age, probably around 8 to 11 years old, these children can have a short lesson about the importance of the latrines and, where to find them, and, just talk about some of the things that we already talked about, like, putting them downhill, how to maintain them, just simple things that to understand. And, an activity that they could do would be signs that show the location of where these latrines can be, so that people in the community know where to access them, so that when they're busy or when they're working, they don't just go to the bathroom wherever they can, so they know where to go to the bathroom. And it'd be a fun activity for the kids to, put up the stakes and put the signs up, and so that they know where to go and they can show other people where to go to the bathroom. And so that would just be kind of fun for them and pretty memorable for them to know what to do. And then for older children, later in their school, at least 12 years old until even 18 or however old they're still in school, the children can have classes on the importance of latrines, just like the younger children do, but just a little more detail. And then a fun activity that they can do would be to build actual models of the pit latrines. And these can be as simple as just using popsicle sticks, or they can actually go out and just build smaller versions, using the concrete, like we talked about earlier. And this would be so important because, like we talked about, the latrines need to be rebuilt pretty often. And so for them to know how to maintain them from hands-on experience and how to build these will really help them to know what to do later when it comes to the real deal. Because oftentimes in interventions, we just say what we want to have happen and then nobody knows what to do. So having that hands-on experience is very crucial for that training as well. So next. And so just to follow up with the education, as we kind of already talked about, for the younger children, it's really important for them to be learning consistently, and a good way to do that is to always be putting up signs where the latrines are. Like I said, they're going to be moved a lot, they're going to be rebuilt, so having that constantly updated can really help people know where to go, and it's always something fun for the kids to do. And Mary talked about how it's beneficial for the older children to have that hands-on experience. So next. And then just to talk about some of the costs of the intervention. We don't have detailed what we would do for the classes yet, but we definitely don't want it to be, a PowerPoint or something like that. Definitely more hands-on for the lessons. And so that'd be more cost-effective as well. Just paper, pencils, anything that we'd want for the classes. Any supplies for the signs, putting up the stakes, the signs, making them good quality material would be important as well, so they can be moved. And then probably the most expensive part would just be the supplies for the models that the older children would build. But like I said, that can range from just popsicle sticks and glue to, the actual cement later on. So next. And so an issue that we wanted to talk about was the trust issue of people, health educators coming into Kenya, because we want to recognize that nobody wants people telling them what to do. And we think that our intervention is good because it allows people to be worked with, and that they can have the hands-on experience that we were talking about, instead of just throwing information out there and expecting them to just know what to do. And, as health educators that would be doing this, they would be very hands-on, and they would be teaching them the children how to build the latrines or where to put the signs, and they would definitely be a part of it, and they would always be following up and figuring out what's successful and what's not. And another part of the trust would be, teaching those children, because, a good part of the families are going to be children, and so the siblings will be going to school together, and they can be working on these projects together and have fun doing it, and those children can be able to teach their parents, and so that would make it very, it'd be less intimidating for it to be a part of a family than to just be a class or something that just the adults would be part of, because we want the whole family to be involved, since everybody in the family obviously goes to the bathroom, and everybody in the family needs to be safe from those diseases that we talked about. Next. And so some other concerns that we could think of would be the cost. We don't, in high traffic areas, as we said before, the latrines would need to be replaced often, and so that can get kind of expensive, and so, but we kind of figured that would be a lot less expensive than more permanent structures, because you wouldn't have to worry about, running water, and the time and energy and money to fund that, especially in not so high traffic areas. And we wouldn't have to worry about those water systems. Another concern would be how effective the education is, but that's something that as we follow up on, we can figure out what's working and what's not. But the hands-on experiences are definitely better as far as children remembering what's going on, and they can have fun. We didn't want to just, test them and teach classes. We definitely wanted something more fun for them. Next. And so these are our references, and that's it.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.